We want to hear some more about CRT in just a bit. But Tom, during COVID, I don't know if it was the same in England, but in South Africa, our churches were closed. And you guys responded. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what happened when the church was closed?
Yeah, I was saying this morning, actually, if the 11 o'clock service, many of us will be familiar with Jesus' story of taking a young boy's packed lunch, a little bit of bread and fish, and taking that and multiplying it to feed thousands. And one of the things about God is he really is able to do that. It's not a parable. It's what God does. And I think it is like a parable for what he wants to do with our lives. And during lockdown, the first week, we were overseeing a congregation, and I was looking out. I could tell you could kind of tell that we were unlikely to be there next week. So I was looking out across our congregation, and I was picking out the people who were living on their own or isolated, and some of the elderly. And I was just thinking, are we going to see you again? We didn't know what COVID meant at that point. It kind of seemed like everyone went to hospital and died. So it's like, who's going to be here when we reopen? And then how are we going to look after you while you're gone? So, how are we going to keep in touch and be friends? How are we going to help you to get medicines? And how are we going to help you get food? And that was a real difficulty because our supermarkets were completely empty. So when we would go to the shops, there was hardly anything on the shelves, and there wasn't any loo roll, there was nothing. And it was shocking, let alone getting food for others, for all these people. And so I spent a few days just calling up people saying, can you help us get food? Can you help us get food? And no one could. And after what felt like forever, it's probably only 4 or 5 days, there's one company who said, we'll help you prioritize food for vulnerable people. So thrilled. Then we had no money. So I rang out everyone I knew that night and said, would you just consider putting some funding in? And they raised £10,000, which is about, I think, 200,000 rand. And so that was exciting. And then it was like, how much of that money should we spend now? And I think we thought that this thing might last for 6 weeks or so. So do we just chunk it out? And we just thought, no, we're not going to do that. We're literally going to buy £10,000 worth of food, and then we're going to trust God that he helps us to get that out, and we work out what to do with it, and that he'll bring us more if we need it. And so the food was due to arrive 2 or 3 days later, which was on a Thursday afternoon. And that morning, we got a phone call from one of our sites, which is in a part of North London, which is incredibly deprived and challenged. And they said, our local food bank has closed down. We've got 70 families, refugees, asylum seekers, others who have absolutely no way of getting any food. And is there anything we can do to help? I think fully expecting us to say, oh my goodness, how awful, but there's nothing there's no way we can help. But instead, we were able to say, do you know what? We've got £10,000 worth of food arriving in 2 hours' time. So how about we get some of that down to you? And what it made us realise was there was something that we could do, because actually our church is in a relatively wealthy part of London. Our local shop is Harrods, if you know that.
Not that we shop there.
And we do have real needs around us. For example, there's a lot of homelessness, which we respond to. But it's like, another thing we can do, we've got the ability to get in resource at scale and then get it out to the churches who are on the front lines, because churches are embedded in every community all over the country, and they've got a way of, they know everybody in need, or they know somebody who knows them, and they're relational and they know how to support them. So we started to pile down this route. Well, anyway, so that was amazing. God multiplied a vision that started with just a few to grow it more widely. And then somebody in our congregation rang us up and said, I love what you're doing. I think it'd be amazing to help more churches do that. And I'm prepared to fund another 10 cities to set up a kind of hub, a bit like what you're doing. So I said to our team, let's see, we've done 1 in a week. Let's see if we can do 10 in the next week. Never thinking that we'd do that, but I thought, set a high vision and then you settle for something less. And But within a week, we had 10 more cities setting up these hubs. And what started to happen was, in a way that I've never experienced before, I get calls from food companies saying, we've got food, you've got a network, can we help? And then the government rang us up. Now, I've been trying to work with the government for 20 years, and I have failed spectacularly at every turn. And suddenly they're ringing us up saying, hey, it's great what you're doing, can we get more funding to the church to do more of this? And within 3 months, we're working with the government on a scheme of £9.5 million with churches, over 1,000 churches and other organisations all coming together of every type of church: Catholics, Pentecostals, Anglican, Coptic Orthodox, Salvation Army, and just all coming together to say, we're going to work together in this nation for the nation's good. We are not asleep, but we don't want the country to look back on COVID and think, where was the church? It was dead. But we're going to reach out, we're going to love people, and people are going to see that God is alive. And so we saw an even greater multiplication than we could have imagined. And we delivered during that time 20 million meals to people in need across the country. And honestly, relationships were forged in that time, which have changed the way churches are now operating. So relationships with local councils and local businesses. And we are now working with this movement, which is called Love Your Neighbour. It's just an alliance of churches gathered around 80 city hubs. And we're helping them not only continue to meet crisis need, and we've had a lot more since then. So we took a lead. We ran, in our own church, as far as I know, the largest support for Ukrainians coming into the country. And we were having over 300 Ukrainians coming in every Thursday afternoon. And we were the first people that our local council rang when they knew they were being kind of overwhelmed with numbers, because both with the COVID response and then in between that, helping people coming in from Afghanistan out of Kabul airport, again, they'd seen that the church were those on the ground to help. And so it's been an amazing journey. And our vision is that we would see the church at the forefront of the renewal of communities in our country, because we believe that is a call on the church. It is a part of our witness. And as one of the big church leaders in our country, a man called Pastor Agu, a man from Nigeria, leads a Pentecostal movement of churches, said to us, because we're all quite English and we feel a bit embarrassed to talk about this kind of thing. It's like we don't mind doing it, but we just don't want anyone to know what's going on. And then even worse with Church of England, so we're even worse at that. And so everyone's saying, oh, I don't really want, to sort of, we shouldn't talk about this too much. And Pastor Aggie said to us, the country has no idea of what's going on through churches, and we've got to let them know. And yes, Jesus did say, don't let your left hand know what your right hand, which all our churches love that verse. But he said, he also said in Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount, such an important message in his mission. He said, do not hide your light under a bushel, but let your light shine. How? That people might see your good deeds and glorify, not yourselves, it's not about you, it's not about us, but glorify your Father in heaven. So all that, so something, in a way, I think, and actually through COVID, I do think, it's like all these things God never brings. He doesn't author things that are meant for harm, but he is always at work in every situation and circumstance. And we're seeing so many stories, and I'm sure you've seen them here too, of how actually God, in his grace, has used COVID and is shaking things up, changing things, and bringing new life.
That is so exciting, and we are just in awe of what the Lord has been doing through you and through your organisational efforts.